So you guys sent in this book, Fireproof by Mike Morse. We are going to dive into this.
Oh, yeah.
And really get into all the strategies he used to kind of grow and transform his personal injury law firm.
Yeah.
But really what we're going to be trying to do here is pull out the principles that led to his success. That could be helpful for anyone, even if you're not in the legal field.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting about Morse is it's a specific industry.
Right.
But he's dealing with trying to scale a business, manage teams and make decisions and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of applicability there.
Absolutely. And I think, his journey wasn't just a smooth upward curve.
Right. Yeah.
Like he had these turning points that he called fires in his career. He had a literal fire in his office in 2008.
Oh, wow.
And then in 2011, he kind of had this major shift where a key referral source, a guy named Sid, stopped sending cases his way.
Oh.
And so that was kind of this moment for him to rethink his approach.
Interesting, yeah, because sometimes it takes those fires to really spur on some innovation and rethinking your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the central themes in the book is, he talks about running your law firm or really any business, like your biggest case. So I'm curious, what does that look like?
Well, I think what it means is that same intensity and planning and focus that you would put on maybe your biggest project, you got to embed that into the DNA of how your business runs.
Yeah. And so this book is packed with practical strategies that he implemented with his COO, John Natchizel.
Okay.
So it's not just theoretical stuff.
Right.
This is stuff they put into action.
Interesting.
And we're going to be talking about some really specific, tangible steps that you could even consider for your own business.
Okay.
And trust me, there are some surprising facts and actionable insights here.
Okay.
So get ready.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that kind of jumps out to me is the synergy between Morse and his COO, Natchizel. It seems like they had a good thing going.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into some of the takeaways here.
Okay.
And the first one we want to talk about is knowing yourself and your business. So, this might sound really simple, but it's pretty crucial to the rest of the book.
Right.
And actually what's interesting about this is Morse himself says he was skeptical about defining your core values when he first started.
Oh, interesting.
He didn't really get it.
Yeah.
But he credits a business coach with helping him identify what those were.
Okay.
And these weren't just nice sounding aspirations or anything.
Yeah.
This is really about what were the actual strengths and guiding principles that were already contributing to his successes.
Yeah.
Things like having an excellent reputation, doing great work, providing outstanding customer service, maintaining a positive attitude, being a team player, and always striving to do the right thing.
I mean, that's a good list. I feel like a lot of those resonate with me.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think the question for the listener is, which ones resonate with you?
Yeah.
And which ones maybe you haven't even thought about that are kind of driving things behind the scenes?
Right.
Because, I think those are the kind of core values that could be helpful to really uncover and take a look at.
Right. And building on that idea of, really knowing your core values and who you are as a business.
Yeah.
Then it moves on to this idea of delegate and elevate.
Okay.
Which I think a lot of people struggle with. But
what is that all about?
Well, it's really about strategically focusing your time and energy on the tasks that you are best at and enjoy most.
Yeah.
And then entrusting the other responsibilities to your team members.
Yeah.
And so Morse actually describes this exercise where he literally listed all of his tasks.
Okay.
And he categorized them. He had a category of things he loved and was good at, things that he liked and was good at, things he didn't like but was good at. And then finally, things that he hated and wasn't good at.
Oh, yeah. Get that off your plate, right?
Exactly. And so that last category, he was like, okay, this is what I need to delegate.
Yeah. What are some of the things that prevent people from delegating, though? I'm just curious, what are some of the reasons that you've seen?
Well, I think it comes down to trust.
Okay.
Do you trust your team members enough to give them these responsibilities? And then I think the other thing is, having processes in place.
Right.
To make sure that, things are going to be done the way you want them done.
Yeah. Okay.
Even if you're not doing them.
So you have to set those expectations up correctly.
Exactly. And so Morse actually realized that he was getting really bogged down in tasks that he didn't like. And one of the things he specifically didn't like was firing people.
Oh, yeah, that's tough.
He didn't like to fire employees. And so that's what actually led him to hire his COO, John Nachozzel, and John took over a lot of those necessary but unpleasant responsibilities.
Okay, so that's a perfect example of delegating.
Yes.
And elevating.
Yes.
Right, because he was able to focus on the things that he was good at and liked, and then, his COO took over the other stuff.
So that brings us to the complementary roles of the visionary and integrator, which I think, they both talk about in the book being super critical for their growth.
Yeah.
So Morse identifies himself as the visionary.
Okay.
Right? He's the person who generates the big ideas, focuses on the future direction of the firm.
Yeah.
And then Nakazel is the integrator, who's the one who takes those ideas, translates them into actionable plans, builds the systems and processes and accountability structures to really make it happen.
Got it. So it's almost like an architect and then the construction manager.
Exactly. Yeah. And in the foreword, they describe themselves as like the perfect rocket fuel combination.
Oh, wow.
And Morse is really adamant that this partnership with clearly defined roles was absolutely essential to their ability to scale.
Right. It just shows the power of having those different skill sets within the leadership team.
Absolutely.
Because you need someone that's got the vision, and then you need someone that can get it done.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a perfect example of that.
Okay, so moving on here.
Okay.
Hiring, firing, and paying strategically.
Okay. This is good stuff.
This is an area where Morse really challenges some traditional approaches.
Interesting. Okay.
So he makes this really compelling argument that the conventional hiring process that relies on resumes, interviews, reference checks, that often falls short when it comes to actually predicting how someone's going to do in your organization.
Right, because you just don't know from those things.
Exactly. And so what he actually talks about is pre-interview testing. So we're not talking about like basic skills assessment, right? Like can you use Word or whatever. He's talking about validated tools that measure things like IQ, honesty, personality traits, behavioral tendencies, even cognitive skills, through things like the Wonderlic test.
What do you think about that?
Well, he actually says he was hesitant at first, too.
Really?
He thought it was kind of an unnecessary expense.
Okay.
But then he decided to take the tests himself. And apparently he was really struck by the accuracy of how the test reflected his own strengths and weaknesses.
Interesting. Okay.
And so that kind of completely sold him.
So like a light bulb went off.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. And so basically the logic is that these tests offer valuable data points about how a candidate's likely to think, behave, interact with a team.
Right.
And ultimately, it can improve team dynamics and reduce those hiring mistakes.
So you're not just shooting in the dark.
Yeah.
You're really being more intentional with who you bring on board.
Right. And he actually talks about, benchmarking these test results against their own top performing employees.
Got it.
So they can kind of get like an ideal candidate profile. And use that.
I like that.
And then the other thing is, it's not just about being strategic in who you hire. It's also about that philosophy, hire, slow fire, fast.
So what does that mean?
So it means you're taking your time, you're really vetting people.
Yeah.
But then when you do find someone who's not working out, you don't wait around. You got to get them out.
Okay. So you're not, kind of just delaying the inevitable.
Right, exactly. And then the other thing is the compensation. A really strategic approach to compensation with a huge emphasis on incentives.
So how does that work?
So he talks about how, while a base salary is important, you want to be competitive, but tying a portion of the employee's comp to performance through things like bonuses and profit sharing.
That's a really powerful motivator.
I like that because it makes them feel bought in.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
To the success of the company.
Yeah. And John Knotzel actually had some key principles for structuring bonuses.
So what are those?
He said, avoid being greedy.
Yeah.
Don't try to keep all the profits for yourself. Be really transparent about how the bonuses are calculated. And then really crucially, he said, base them on profit. Not just revenue.
Right, because revenue is vanity, profit is sanity.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
So you're really aligning everyone with the financial health of the company.
Yeah, everyone's on the same page.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
So moving on, let's talk about what he calls the legal jumbotron.
The legal jumbotron. Okay.
I know that sounds kind of interesting, right?
It does sound a little different.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Well, he compares it to like the scoreboard
Okay.
on a sporting event.
Yeah.
So it's basically like a comprehensive dashboard. Okay.
For all your key performance indicators.
Yeah.
So really understanding those vital signs of your business.
Right. Like your business's stats.
Exactly.
Right.
And Morse actually admits that before he implemented this system, he was basically flying blind.
Oh, wow.
He didn't have a clear understanding of the numbers driving the business.
That's scary.
Yeah. Well, it is, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners struggle with that, especially those who are maybe like experts in their service.
Right.
But haven't necessarily, honed those data analytics skills.
Okay.
And so he outlines these essential metrics for a contingency-based personal injury firm.
Cool.
So for those who don't know, that means that you only get paid if you win the case.
Right.
So some of these metrics are things like gross settlements,
Okay.
number of cases with attorney's fees, net attorney's fees,
Okay.
new client inquiries,
Yeah.
new client signups, referrals out, referral income.
Okay.
And then lawsuits filed.
So it's like a lot of data. How would you say is the most important thing on that list?
Well, I think, just knowing how many clients you're bringing in versus how many you're settling and the net profit.
Right.
I mean, those are the fundamental numbers.
You got to know where you stand.
You don't know where you stand exactly. And without those numbers, it's really hard to assess your growth, identify any potential problems.
And where things might be going wrong.
Right. And so Morse explains that, tracking this data allowed them to do things like forecast their future performance, identify underperforming areas, measure the effectiveness of different initiatives.
Yeah.
So, for example, they could see which types of cases weren't as profitable and make the decision to refer those out.
Got it.
And they could also see, how much they were relying on those referrals from SID.
Okay.
And when that source dried up, that really gave them the data to justify investing in television advertising.
So they could see the impact of that.
Exactly. Okay, that's really cool.
Yeah. So the data was really powerful for them.
Okay.
Okay, so moving on, the fourth key principle is run your business like your biggest case.
Okay.
So we're coming full circle here.
Back to the beginning.
Back to the very first idea.
Right.
And this really just means applying that same level of planning and attention to detail to your business operations as you would to a big complex case.
Right.
And so he talks about setting really clear goals.
Okay.
3-year goals.
Yeah.
Annual goals and quarterly goals.
Okay.
And these aren't just like, I hope this happens.
Yeah.
They need to be very specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound.
Smart goals.
Smart goals, yeah.
Okay.
And he actually does this great example of how they needed to sign up.
Yeah.
1,820 cases with a 15% higher average value.
Wow, that's so specific.
Very specific.
Yeah.
And so grounding your goals in historical data.
And a realistic assessment of your firm's capacity. That's super important.
Right, because you need to be able to hit those goals.
Right.
It can't just be something that's out there.
Yeah.
You need to be able to actually reach it.
Absolutely. And he also talks about how they transitioned from a traditional law firm model to a more team-based approach.
Okay, so how did that work?
So they had these like mini law firms.
Mini law firms within the bigger firm.
Yeah, within the bigger firm.
Okay.
And so each of these teams would have a lawyer, a secretary, a paralegal, and they would work together on specific sets of cases. Yeah. And then they would tie the success and profitability of each team to the bonuses.
So it's almost like their own little business within the business.
Exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so to make sure that everything was running smoothly and everyone knew what was expected of them, they had this really comprehensive office manual.
Office manual, okay.
And he talks about how, it's not just like a list of rules.
Right.
He says, you need to make it welcoming, easy to understand.
Yeah.
Especially for new employees.
So have a nice tone to it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so it covered everything.
Yeah.
From, employment policies to how to interact with clients, all the different procedures.
That's great, because I think having those things documented really helps.
Yeah.
So people are on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. And then, he also touches on having office space that can accommodate future growth.
Yeah.
And then this this really interesting anecdote about how he hired a receptionist who had no legal experience, but she had amazing customer service skills.
Okay.
And he poached her from a Fuddruckers.
From a Fuddruckers?
Yeah, a burger joint.
Wow. Okay, so he was really looking at those soft skills.
Yeah.
And that customer service mindset.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and he really emphasizes that. Yeah. The receptionist is like the first point of contact.
Right.
So you want someone who's going to...
make a good impression.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so all right, fifth and final takeaway.
Okay, let's hear it.
This one's got a really catchy title.
What is it?
Cherry Garcia Beats Vanilla.
Oh, that's a good one.
So this is all about differentiation and marketing.
Okay, marketing.
Yeah.
I like this topic.
Yeah, so he talks about how in a crowded marketplace, you need to stand out.
Right, you don't want to just blend in.
Yeah, and he uses this analogy of being Cherry Garcia.
Cherry Garcia.
Instead of vanilla.
I see, so it's like you're the unique flavor.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he talks about how they made the decision to invest in high-quality professional television commercials and to move away from that free or low-quality stuff.
Right.
And so their goal with these ads was to be memorable. Yeah. Impactful, whether that was through humor, whimsy, or just being inspiring. And they had this tagline that was Mike wins.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, really simple.
Yeah.
And he mentions a couple of specific ads in the book.
Okay, what were they?
Like the ambulance chaser commercial.
The ambulance chaser commercial.
And then one featuring an injured triathlete named Jesus.
Okay, so you're really trying to hit those emotions and be memorable.
Exactly.
Okay.
I like that. And so he's really advocating for developing that distinctive brand identity that resonates with your target audience and really communicates, you know, not just what services you offer, but also your firm's personality and value.
But it's more than just what you do, it's who you are.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also about tracking where those new cases are coming from and adapting your marketing accordingly.
Right.
So whether that's through TV billboards, Google Ads sponsorships, remarketing word of mouth, direct mail.
Okay, so it's a lot of different ways.
Yeah, he's got all kinds of ideas in there.
That's cool.
But really the key is, you know, start small and scale as you see what's working.
Got it.
And he's really adamant that even the most creative, effective advertising won't help if your business operations aren't sound.
Right.
Like you need to be able to handle those new clients.
So it's almost like you can have the best marketing in the world.
Yeah.
But if you can't deliver on the back end, then it's all for nothing.
Yeah, you're going to have all these problems.
Yeah.
So, okay, wrapping up here.
Yeah.
What are the key benefits that really stand out for businesses that adopt these principles?
I mean, I think the big thing is predictability.
Yeah.
Right. If you can create a predictable business, then you can create predictable profits.
Yes.
And so I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the other thing is better employee engagement.
Right.
Right. If you treat people well, you compensate them fairly, they're going to be happier and they're going to be more bought in.
And more productive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then the final thing is it frees up the owner or leader to really focus on the big picture strategy and growth.
Instead of fighting fires all the time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And like we talked about at the beginning, you know, while these examples come from a law firm, these principles can really be applied to any business. Yeah. Or even just personal development.
Right. I mean, like knowing yourself.
Yeah.
Being strategic.
Yeah.
Using data.
Yeah.
Differentiating yourself.
Those are all just good principles.
Yeah.
In general.
For life.
For life, exactly.
That's cool.
So I'm curious, for you listening, you know, what's one thing that stood out to you?
What's one area
that you could apply immediately to your situation?
Like, what's one thing that really resonated with you that you could go out and do today?
Yeah. And start thinking about what your Cherry Garcia is.
Yeah. What makes you unique?
Yeah.
What's your special flavor?
Yeah, exactly. So that's it for this deep dive.
Thanks
for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.